Coming up, at home in the wilderness of Lake Clark, where one man lived his Alaskan dream.
I think people's attraction to Dick Proenneke is so multifaceted.
Was it because he used only hand tools to build his cabin? His writings about life alone in the woods? The films he shared with the world? Or his passion for protecting wilderness?
He was one of my biggest heroes.
Dick's message is very, very important in this world, right now, more than perhaps any other time.
Ahead, how a man who tread lightly on the land left his mark in history.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come. Bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program. We're here in Port Allsworth, the gateway to Lake Clark National Park. But before it was a park, Dick Proenneke moved here to live a life of solitude and to explore his own personal frontier. Twin Lakes is about 120 air miles southwest of Anchorage. About a 25-minute flight from Port Allsworth. Dick Proenneke landed here in 1968 on a wilderness adventure that turned into a 30-year love affair with Twin Lakes. An adventure he captured on camera. He even filmed himself to show how he built his cabin with logs he cut down himself. He used only hand tools with no help from anyone. His films are still popular today on public television stations everywhere, while his journals have found new audiences.
How's it going?
They fly in from all over the world to make the pilgrimage to Proenneke's homestead, which today is part of a national park.
So this is Dick Proenneke's cabin. Dick came here in 1968.
Although he died in 2003, the cabin still looks almost exactly like it did when Dick lived here.
Yeah, I encourage you guys to go inside and see what life was like for Dick, and let me know if you think you'd like to live here for 30 years.
I don't know about that.
One of the ironies, Dick Proenneke is much more celebrated outside of the state, maybe because there are a lot of log homes in the wild. But as fans say, this one is so much more than a cabin.
It's an important landmark in Alaska.
For people who have seen the films and read the journals, Dick Proenneke has almost a cult-like following.
There's the chimney built by hand.
Sean Avra is from Michigan. On another visit here, he brought his Uncle Bill.
He's watched the movie lots and lots and lots, and he never thought in his life that he would ever have a chance to actually stand on the beach and look at the cabin. It was a pretty emotional thing for him.
Now, Sean Avra wants his kids and grandkids to see how Proenneke lived.
This is his dream, and this is what he wanted to do, and he accomplished it.
But when he moved to Twin Lakes, he didn't know if he was capable of surviving on his own. And later, he said he wanted to find out if he was equal to everything the wild land could throw at him.
Many of us would wonder, I think, gosh, could I do what Proenneke did? Do I have the capability to do that?
I find that a person alone is much more cautious than when you have someone with you, because you know that if you mess up, why, that's it.
In a 1977 National Park Service documentary, Dick Proenneke talks about how he came to Alaska to become a cattle rancher, but also found jobs in Kodiak as a mechanic and carpenter, skills he picked up in the Navy during World War II. What ultimately brought him to Twin Lakes? A welding accident that set off an explosion of molten lead.
It got in my eyes pretty bad, and for a short time, and he didn't know if I was going to see very much.
After visiting some friends at Twin Lakes, he decided to move here, a place where he could see beauty every day and reinvent himself at the age of 52.
This is pretty nice here. Let's not spoil it.
For many Alaskans, it would come as a surprise that Proenneke's books and films played a part in the national movement to preserve wilderness for wilderness's sake, and brought attention to Alaska, where many of its citizens still think of the wilderness around them as infinite.
And I think that where Proenneke was an area that was particularly susceptible. You could fly easily into Lake Clark with a float plane and exploit whatever might be available.
And here you have pretty much all the game. You have sheep, and you have bear, and caribou, and moose, and many places have more of each, but not all of them. So that makes Twin Lakes a little bit special.
Proenneke wanted to do his part to protect Twin Lakes. He eventually stopped hunting big game animals and instead ate mostly fish.
In summer, I fished quite a bit. I lived on trout to a great extent for meat and berries. But I didn't kill any big game because for one man it's too much. Too much meat, too much would go to waste.
Dick Proenneke was known to hike 9 or 10 miles a day.
I was always anxious to get out after a good snow because they say after snow you know who lives in the country.
An intimacy with nature that comes only from being immersed in it. In time, Proenneke began to write about the animals as if they were his friends.
And he has a film of a bear. And the bear, it's fall, and the bear is eating a lot of berries. And he comments that he's stoking up for winter, and pretty soon he'll go off and find a hole. And he says, I'll miss him. I'll miss him. He's one of my companions.
Well, some have likened Dick Proenneke to a modern-day Henry David Thoreau. The two men had a very different relationship with the land.
Thoreau, when things got tough at Walden Pond, went back to Concord and had a nice dinner.
The decades Dick Proenneke spent at Twin Lakes were a demanding personal frontier.
I think Proenneke is a wonderful ideal Alaskan, if you will, because he does marry, I think, both the spirit of independence, the determination to test oneself and see what you can do on your own, together with the value of the environment for what it is and for taking it as it comes.
So many layers of the man to know. Woodsman, writer, filmmaker, master carpenter, and a spirit as vast as the land itself. Up next, Dick Proenneke's legacy and how the Park Service plans to preserve it. Many Alaskans have carved out their dream of living in the wilderness, but Dick Proenneke's story opens a door to the wilderness like no other.
It's not Dick's cabin that's the most important thing out here. It's Dick's cabin in the wilderness.
Kay Schubeck and Monroe Robinson have spent many summers at Twin Lakes as volunteers for the National Park Service.
There's something about Dick's life that really touches people.
Kay and Monroe were longtime friends of Dick Proenneke and loved to share their stories.
This is Hope Creek here, 3-minute walk from Dick's cabin. Easy little walk up here to get some drinking water or catch a fish.
The stories behind how Dick Proenneke made himself at home in the wilderness are an endless source of fascination for visitors.
We have people who will come here and all they want to do is get Monroe or myself to talk just about the door.
The Dutch door is Kay's favorite part of Dick's handmade home.
Which allows more light in there. Beautifully done.
A portal into the mind of Dick Proenneke.
To me, this is his art. This is Dick the artist. And this is Dick the engineer.
Handmade hinges out of a stump from a spruce tree, and a wooden latch which appears to have frustrated a bear,
So this is the bear.
as well as spots from where porcupines chewed up the wood.
The porcupine loved Dick's door. Oh, this is Porcupine. He called all the rest of the animals his neighbors and friends, but the porcupines, oh my goodness.
More than a half-century old, the cabin has aged well, thanks to the care it's had from Park Service volunteers and staffers. But it's also a testament to Proenneke's skills as a master builder.
Come on in, watch your head here now.
That sound you hear is the crunch of the gravel floor. Every spring, Dick washed all the pebbles by hand.
This is Dick's chair, and this is his original table. And this is the beautiful view that Dick looked at for 31 years.
But he was often gone for the day on hikes.
And he would put this little sign that says, "Here today" on it. And then look at all the holes in that.
Wow, he hiked in a lot of places.
He hiked a lot of places, and many places very far from here.
Dick racked up 3,000 miles a year on foot, about the same distance from east to west across the lower 48.
Good grief, this is completely smooth. So he walked and walked and walked until he took it right off.
You can also see how Dick patched his boots.
He was a recycler before his time.
A man who loved to turn other people's trash into treasure.
They're getting pretty rusty now.
Even stuff like old gas cans that hunters and pilots left behind.
So that's Dick's relationship with this entire wilderness area, almost single-handedly keeping it clean for 3 decades.
Dick was also a wilderness MacGyver, the star of that popular TV spy show, who was an improviser extraordinaire and used whatever was on hand, even metal from airplane wrecks.
He salvaged parts and screws and aluminum and other pieces of steel off of those airplanes that he would then incorporate into his life here.
Like this crimping tool made from the strut of an airplane wing.
It makes a much, much nicer crimp than the little commercial crimping tool.
A tool he used a lot on his cooking utensils.
This is one of Dick's little trays for his silverware.
Also cut from a metal gas can.
The action is crimp and bend. Crimp and bend. It takes some pressure to bend.
Monroe has studied all of Proenneke's homemade household goods, an ingenuity he didn't fully appreciate until he tried to make replicas.
Dick actually made this as a 3-legged stool, and then it was a little unstable with 3 legs.
Monroe even takes care to preserve the flaws in Dick's work.
And so this 3rd leg is still here even in the replica.
This is a replica of a chair that John Denver and Margaret Murray sat in. So what about the next generation?
Dick's message is very, very important in this world, right now, more than perhaps any other time.
It's a message you can find inside his cabin, that wildlife should not suffer for his presence, a belief Dick Proenneke put into practice here at Twin Lakes. He tread lightly, yet left his mark on the world with a creativity that could turn a humble tool, even a rake, into a user-friendly piece of art. It's really nice.
It's a lightweight rake, and Dick used this a lot.
To rake gravel on the beach and remove snow from the roof of his cabin.
These are 4-inch nails that he cut off the points.
So why not just buy a rake? Well, that was something Dick was stubborn about.
Dick's philosophy of using hand tools to make things and make things out of what's already here. He didn't want to import materials from Anchorage even to make things.
He would pick up anything. He just was a tidy-up kind of guy.
And definitely detail-oriented, maybe even a little eccentric.
And you have to rake it a certain way. You have to rake it from here up.
But Dick had his reasons. He read the gravel like a book.
He wanted to know what animals came by. He wanted to know if people came in, if a different plane came in or a boat came in. But he really just liked it looking neat. It's a lot of work. You get strong muscles. And he had plenty of strong muscles.
but age eventually caught up with him. At 82, Dick was no longer strong enough to live at home in the wilderness, so he moved in with his brother Ray in California. Before he left, Dick had one last request of Kay and Monroe, that they would rake his beach.
But I promised him I'd do it, so I do it.
Up next,
I think there's a great appetite and interest in Proenneke.
why there will be plenty of material to satisfy the demand, and much of it in the words of the man himself. Welcome back to Frontiers. The partnership between the National Park Service and Dick Proenneke continues today here at Lake Clark. And for one man, it's a labor of love. There's the beauty of Lake Clark and also its rich history, which John Branson has written a lot about, from Alaska natives to early settlers, and now Dick Proenneke. Branson has taken on the job as editor of more than 3 decades of journals, and this is just 10 years worth.
This is the transcriptions from all that material. I've got an 813-page manuscript based on these 10 years.
Branson and Proenneke were also friends who enjoyed long hikes together.
He was putting on thousands of miles, maybe 3,000 miles a year.
It sounds like Dick Proenneke was like a professional hiker.
Definitely, yeah. He had such big calluses on his feet, he'd sand them down.
Once, the two made a 30-mile trip to Dick's nearest neighbor, Governor J. Hammond, and his wife Bella. They started out on foot, but had to build this raft to reach the Hammond homestead. Jay snapped this photo of what turned out to be one of many adventures. Could you keep up with him?
I could keep up with him, yeah. I learned from him to don't quit.
As long as he was physically able, Dick Proenneke never quit writing about Twin Lakes.
He epitomizes the Alaska frontier, the bush.
Proenneke's first book of journal entries, One Man's Wilderness, became a bestseller, due in part to his collaboration with Sam Keith, a polished and gifted writer.
Dick was kind of peeved at Sam. He said, "Why don't you use my words directly instead of embellishing them?"
In working with his journals, does he have a particular style, a literary style?
I mean, it's simple and direct. You know, he didn't use a lot of flowery language. A very fine conversationalist. I think, in a way, he is like an everyman's wilderness advocate.
Proenneke's daily hikes into the wilderness turned him into an expert on animal behavior. He would watch the bears go into their dens in the fall. Sometimes he looked inside.
He heard a growl, so he got out of there really quickly because he knew the bear was, in fact, in there.
Proenneke's relationship with nature was about as close as it can get. Do you think he was documenting his life for himself or for others?
I think he was doing it for posterity, future generations. I think he was very conscious of that. His heart was always on the side of the wildlife and the natural world and preservation.
One Man's Wilderness in the films fed into the legend that Dick lived with little human contact. But in truth, his survival was dependent on pilots like Babe Allsworth, who brought him supplies. And when Lake Clark became a national park, he relished the role as the unofficial ambassador of Twin Lakes.
Proenneke was busy doing things with people, and he would write about what he did.
His writings also reveal how his feelings about hunting big game shifted over time. Rather than kill an animal, he would rather scavenge.
On one occasion, he knew wolves were around and there was a moose that they were working on, and he ran them off and salvaged some of the meat.
So how was it?
It was excellent, just like any other moose soup I've had. Very good.
John Branson has combed through more than 100 pounds of notebooks Dick Proenneke left behind. A man of words indeed, but so much more. Many of Dick Proenneke's personal possessions are here in Anchorage at the National Park Service's downtown headquarters. Although there are no regular visiting hours, you can make an appointment to see this collection. But you have to wear gloves to touch anything. So what do we have here?
This is an early version of one of his berry pickers that he made from a motor oil can.
So many drawers, full of things Dick Proenneke fashioned from what others threw away.
These are some crampons he made out of a barrel, drum lid, and these have been replicated and are out at the cabin now. Here are some lids that he made out of fuel cans. He could have bought a snow shovel. It would have been a lot lighter, but he made this. I also like how much he repaired things. He flew flags, and when they were old, he retired them.
Proenneke was a staunch Republican, his hero, Ronald Reagan. He was also a volunteer for the Park Service.
Up top there's photography equipment and tripods, but here is his backpack. It's a commercial backpack, but he's obviously modified it. He's put this big can that he would hold his big camera lenses. This is his exact, one of his camera bodies. He shot in 16mm and 8mm, and this is the 16mm movie camera.
The images from these cameras were influential. So Proenneke is in some ways responsible for Lake Clark becoming a national park?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, his photography and his films, I think, really helped to make the case for this place.
Proenneke's brother Ray donated just about everything at this archive, including letters and photographs that reveal warm friendships.
So here's one, the park ranger he was, I think, smitten with. Oh, there they are together. So cute.
Patty Brown, who flew to Twin Lakes to see Dick Proenneke on his birthday.
Flew in and surprised him in her formal wear. He didn't have a heart attack on sight, so that was good.
Although he enjoyed the company of women, Proenneke never married and never said anything about it in his journals.
Well, we have 255 of his journals.
All of them are here, except one from 1977 that somehow disappeared.
Never looked at this before. The bitter end, question mark, question mark.
This was Dick Proenneke's very last journal entry, October 15th, 1996. He writes about a bad dream in which bears invade his cabin. Bears he had to fight off with his axe.
So the rest of it's all empty.
Blank, yep.
An abrupt ending to more than 3 decades of journals by a man who lived completely at home in the wilderness and cared enough to share all that he learned. This is the double-bit axe that Dick Proenneke dreamed about, the one he used to fend off bears in his dream, his subconscious perhaps telling him that old age is a bear. Well, he died 7 years later, a sign that even Dick Proenneke knew his limits. But we do know from his journals that his life took a lot of courage and discipline. Our story about Dick Proenneke is not over yet. Stay with us as we bring you a special 1-hour edition of Frontiers. You'll hear from people who knew him and shared his love of Alaska.
Hey, that's part of me.
Coming up, Governor Jay Hammond and his wife Bella, their friendship with Dick Proenneke.
He was one of my biggest heroes.
He cooked for me and filed my feed, and so Wilderness Princess, that was me.
Ahead, beyond the book and the films, the real Dick Proenneke. Welcome back to Frontiers, and our expanded show about an Alaskan who made himself at home in the wilderness, in a way that few will ever know. Dick Proenneke also had some neighbors who were legends in their own right. Of course, the concept of neighborhood was a little different. Dick Proenneke was about 25 to 40 air miles apart from his nearest neighbors, the Allsworth family on the south shore of Lake Clark, and Jay and Bella Hammond on the north shore. Now, there are no roads that connect these homesteads, and even today, the easiest way to get to these places is to fly. If Dick Proenneke had a surrogate family, it probably would be the Allsworths, who call their settlement Port Allsworth. Today, the family runs a popular lodge and flying service started by Leon Allsworth, a pioneer bush pilot known simply as Babe. To supplement the family's diet of fish and game, Babe and his wife Mary started a garden. A garden that's still here, along with the chicken coop that Dick Proenneke built. From time to time, Dick would stay at the Allsworths to give them a hand. He also fixed their heavy equipment. In exchange, Babe delivered Dick's mail and supplies from the outside, along with fresh produce and homemade treats from Mary. Glenn Allsworth Jr. remembers float plane trips to Twin Lakes with his grandfather Babe when he was a young kid.
There's parts of his story that even if you don't understand all the details are still very attractive to people. The idea about leaving things behind and going out and pursuing something that you're very passionate about.
Dick Proenneke's visits to Port Allsworth were a source of amusement for the kids.
And the first thing he'd do is he'd come walking through the house and look at new technology.
It was almost as if Dick Proenneke was a time traveler.
It was always fun just hanging out there with him when he'd first get there. I remember the first time he was looking at a CD player and trying to figure out how it worked.
At the time, Glenn Allsworth Jr. didn't realize that Dick was on his way to becoming a wilderness icon.
Honestly, as a kid, it's your neighbors.
Dick Proenneke's most famous neighbor was probably Governor J. Hammond, who built a cabin at Lake Clark where he returned to live after he retired from politics. Jay also had his own TV show and featured his friend Dick Proenneke in one of the episodes.
This is a story about my nearest neighbor to the north. He lives about 40 miles away and some 2,000 feet above our Lake Clark home.
Jay Hammond's appreciation for Proenneke is easy to see, especially in some of the footage that didn't make it into the show.
No, you're kidding. 40 chins? Well, of course, you're just a young fellow, I realize, but that's ridiculous.
Hammond goaded Dick into doing pull-ups on a wooden bar outside his cabin and told him, not bad for a guy a few years past 70.
I think exercise, especially as you get older, is very important because I think that's where a lot of people break down. They quit, and if you don't lose it, you're going to lose it, you know.
Dick was quite comfortable as he cooked for Hammond's cameraman. He talked about the warmth and safety of home. He called the cabin his best friend, his portal to the wilderness.
I'll snowshoe up above timberline just to stand up there and look down, and it's just silent as death because there's no sound. All you hear is a raven or a magpie or something like that. You just stand up there and listen for a sound, but there is none. It's just completely silent.
It's this love of the country, its profound peace and quiet, that the Hammonds shared with their neighbor to the north.
So why do you stick with the old wood stove?
Because I like it. I love the warmth.
It was on this very stove that Bella Hammond baked the bread she sent off with her husband Jay for their bachelor friend Dick Proenneke. Sometimes, though, Dick came here to the Hammond homestead to help them with their projects.
I remember the first time Jay took me up to his place.
And sometimes Bella flew along with Jay to visit Dick.
Everything was as neat as a pin. I came home feeling like the biggest slob in the world because I'm not that neat.
But all joking aside, Alaska's former First Lady says she admired how her friend watched over the wilderness to keep it pristine.
He was one of my biggest heroes.
Because he made it his mission to clean up trash that others left behind.
I thought if every Alaskan cared about the state that much and worked to keep it in good shape, we wouldn't have to worry about anything.
Dick Proenneke was my neighbor for over 30 years.
Jay Hammond also narrated a National Park Service tribute to Dick Proenneke after he died in 2003.
In today's world of modern conveniences, he chose to live in the wilderness like the old-timers did.
This would be the governor's last appearance on camera, recorded just before his death 2 years later. Hammond wasn't feeling well that day, but was determined to read from his friend's journals.
I had seen the moods in late summer, spring, and fall. But what about the winter? Would I love the isolation then with its bone-stabbing cold, its brooding ghostly silence?
The film documents Dick Proenneke's return to Twin Lakes, since his health forced him to move in with his brother in California.
Nice morning here.
It was to be Dick's last visit, and fitting that the Park Service pilot who flew him to his old home was Leon Allsworth III, one of Babe Allsworth's grandsons.
Oh, boy.
For Leon, Dick's visit brought back childhood memories of times he invited him and his brother to stay at his homestead.
Two rambunctious boys.
Dick gave them their own tent to live in and let them follow him around.
It was an eye-opener probably for Dick as much as anybody.
An intrusion into his bachelor life that gave Dick a chance to do what he did best, be a good friend and neighbor. What might come as a surprise from a man who wrote so much about being alone in the wilderness.
Well, neighbor, good to see you again. Yeah. And you take care of yourself.
Dick Proenneke also made friends with pilots and rangers for the National Park Service. Was he sweet on you, you think, a little bit?
I think I was one other safe relationship with a woman that he could have.
Up next, Patty Brown tells us the story behind why she showed up at Twin Lakes wearing this. Perhaps the best way to know the real Dick Proenneke is through the eyes of people like Patty Brown, who shared his love of the outdoors. Well, earlier in our program, we came across this photo of Patty in the National Park Service archives in Anchorage. We had to know the story behind the party dress. So we tracked her down and caught up with her at a campground outside of Palmer to find out more about that evening gown and her friendship with Dick Proenneke. Patty Brown met Dick Proenneke in 1991 when she went to Twin Lakes to work as a National Park Service ranger. She later became a math and science teacher. So at heart, you're still an outdoors woman.
I'd say. I mean, it's kind of the main point of living in Alaska, in my opinion.
Patty recently retired and lives in Haines, but still likes to travel around the state and camp.
I think I just like waking up to the fresh air. House air and hotel air seems all used up.
Do you remember the air at Twin Lakes?
Oh my gosh, it was really nice. And Labrador tea.
And that was almost 30 years ago.
An Alaskan ranger by the name of Patty Brown paddles up in her kayak.
Patty Brown has a cameo appearance in Alaska's Silence and Solitude, one of the popular Bob Swearer films about Dick Proenneke.
And then your cabin is clear at the end of the lower lake, right?
So it's about 5.5 miles down on the south shore.
Patty spent 2 summers in that ranger cabin on the lower lake, which she called One Woman's Wilderness, a joking reference to Dick Proenneke's book, One Man's Wilderness.
Twin Lakes was sort of ranger nirvana. One of the great assets of Twin Lakes is that it's right at tree line. So the forest isn't really thick. You can see where you're going to go, and then you can just say, oh, I think I want to go there today, and just go.
And she went on many of those hikes with Dick Proenneke, who became a mentor.
I mean, he would ask interesting things. We went over to one big waterfall, and we'd sit there for a while and have lunch, and then he would say, what do you think would happen if you fell in right there? Like, do you think you could make it?
Patty says these conversations schooled her on how to stay safe in the wilderness. She also admired how Dick could be content with his own company, yet still be a very good friend. He kept her picture on his fireplace mantel long after her ranger days were over.
We think he's important, but he thinks we're important. And so then there's a real meeting of the hearts.
Dick Proenneke cheered her up after a bad breakup with her boyfriend. They sat on this beach after a hike with their shoes off and talked.
My feet were all calloused, and he said, you better do something about those. He goes over to his little shop and gets a file and comes out with a really fine file and filed the callus off my foot. And then I said, wow, none of my other friends would ever do this for me. And he said, then you need better friends.
So what about that gown she wore, the one she calls the Barbie doll dress, borrowed from a roommate who worked for an oil company?
He cooked for me and filed my feet, and so Wilderness Princess, that was me. That's why I had to fly over there in that dress.
It was a surprise birthday visit.
He dug up this bottle of champagne that someone had given him before. He was not a drinking person, but he stashed it. He's polite. It's like a little dog with a bone. Buried this.
She and Dick had a good laugh about that. Turned out the champagne had soured, but it was still a vintage moment, polished off with a spitting contest.
Was he sweet on you, you think, a little bit?
I think I was one other safe relationship with a woman that he could have. I don't think he ever would have wanted to be married and have somebody try to change him, but he still liked the company of women.
What do you think Dick Proenneke's greatest legacy is?
I think it's simple living. I think connect with people from the heart and cherish place. Probably every Alaskan has somebody who did Alaska deeper than they did. You know, they went further out. They were more self-sufficient. So maybe each Alaskan has their own little personal mascot. But if you don't have one, Dick's a great one.
After all these years, Dick Proenneke is still with Patty in spirit. Everywhere she goes, she finds something to cherish, even at this campground.
It's like they're racing. Do you think they're racing?
But it's not the birds here that Patty associates with her friend.
Dick always would cock his head like this, like the gray jays do. And then he would teach me how to give them sourdough pancakes without letting them take too much in one swoop.
He gave you that gift then?
Yes, he did. So now I see gray jays and I see him. I feel lucky that Dick Proenneke and I were friends. He was for real, and he touched a lot of lives.
And treated one wilderness princess like royalty. Patty Brown says that she and Dick Proenneke shared many a letter over the years, and she's not alone. Although Dick Proenneke is gone, Fred Hirschman continues to write on his behalf how he hopes to keep his old friend's dream alive. For a guy who lived alone in a remote cabin, Dick Proenneke had a lot of friends. Some of them have formed a group called Friends of Dick Proenneke in Lake Clark National Park, led by Fred Hirschman, who believes wilderness for wilderness's sake will become even more important to future generations. Fred Hirschman met Dick Proenneke in 1983 when he and his girlfriend Cheryl Blady came to Twin Lakes to work as park rangers for the summer. He and Cheryl eventually went separate ways, but he and Dick became friends for life. Today, Fred lives in a house with a backyard view of the Matanuska Glacier and occasionally digs out some of Dick Proenneke's old letters.
Dear Fred, blowing down, meaning blowing down lake, and 25 degrees this PM. Does that sound about right? Lake ice 6 inches a few days ago.
Fred is the artist behind Dick's trademark stamp. He shows us how Dick used magic markers for ink to dress up his homemade stationery. Fred still has the original drawing he made for the stamp, Dick's cabin nestled in the trees. The first time he visited, Dick wasn't there, but the door was unlocked, and he saw from the pin that Dick stuck on the map by his desk that he was off on a hike. Eventually, though, Fred found him at home.
So what was your first impression when you actually met Dick Proenneke?
This man can hike. You know, I was a young buck at that time, and he could out-hike me. I was, I think, 28 years old, and I mean, I would get winded when he was, you know, marching up the hills, and he was in his 60s, so late 60s.
Fred says he was also in awe of Dick's intimate knowledge of the wilderness.
You'd go on a ridge and find this one plant that doesn't bloom anywhere else.
The Park Service still has the specimen Fred collected that day and confirmed it was indeed a rare find.
So did you ever share any of those famous Proenneke meals cooked on his stove?
Yeah, oh yeah. He'd have his sourdough always going, and he'd have usually a pot of beans that would be cooking. He'd catch a lake trout and have, do fish fry.
Fred looked forward to the meals after a full day of hiking, but that's not all they shared. Both loved to write.
Dick was expecting us and had planned a hike of 8 miles around the Orange Top Mountain southeast of his cabin.
Like Dick, Fred kept a journal, each page crowded with details about the beauty that surrounded them and encounters with wildlife.
Along the way, the rock spoke with muffled gurgles and murmurs. Far beneath us, 3 bull caribou ran back and forth across the snowfields, attempting to avoid bothersome insects.
Dick kept the trails to his cabin clear of brush, which animals also used.
The moose loved to hike his trails. Since most of the paths radiate from his cabin, the moose tend to funnel through his yard.
Fred soon began to understand why the cabin was at the heart of Dick Proenneke's wilderness experience. It's why he and others formed a group to protect Dick's legacy.
What was the impetus of starting Friends of Dick Proenneke?
I was friends with Monroe Robinson and Kay Schubeck, the volunteers that had been caretaking Dick's cabin at that time for 12, 13 years. And we realized that the Park Service probably needed some help in maybe getting paid positions out there. They'd been using volunteers for years. Dick Proenneke's cabin, at that time was 45 years old. It was time for it to get a new moss roof on it, and that was going to cost a fair amount of money. Other things had already been done, some by volunteer work of replacing the sill logs and replacing the logs on Dick's cache.
So were there some warning signs that people needed to step in and protect this legacy?
Yeah, there was. The park had been running Dick's cabin in a sense of the way most cabins in rural Alaska are, where they're unlocked. So these couple of fellows came out and were going to spend the summer prospecting Hope Creek and find their mother lode of gold. There was no gold up Hope Creek, but they stayed for the summer prospecting illegally with metal detectors. They're not allowed in national parks. And during that time, Dick's gold pan disappeared and Dick's chinking spud disappeared. And most of them we got recovered from a pawn shop in Anchorage.
We've got lots of cabins out there in the wilderness. Many, many cabins. Why this cabin?
Well, this cabin's extra special because of Dick's journaling his 31 years. There's 80 plus pounds of journals that he wrote from living out there. From what Thoreau did with Walden, that was 2 years living out, fairly close to civilization. Dick Proenneke, on the other hand, lived 31 years, 150, 60 miles from Anchorage, 40 miles from Port Ellsworth, by himself, through long winters, with big storms. He was a modern day Thoreau, but maybe a modern day Thoreau times 15 by the amount of time they lived out there, with a huge following from all the films, the books. People know his story, and they want to come out and see where Dick lived all those years. His cabin's tiny. It's 11 by 15 feet, and he lived in that little cabin comfortably for all those years. It kept him secure and warm during wild winter storms. In the winter of 1989, his thermometer outside quit at 80 below, and there were 3 nights that the alcohol got down to that minus 79, minus 80 point, and that cabin kept him alive during that time.
So what is your favorite thing in that cabin?
Every time I go in, it's sort of difficult because all the times I knew it was with Dick in the cabin, fussing over the wood stove, making supper, rolling up his sticks of dynamite, which were sourdough pancakes that he filled with raw onion and peanut butter. It was Dick's good storytelling and just the life that he brought to the cabin. So when I go back to the cabin, that piece is missing. I so enjoyed Dick when he was living, and that's probably why myself and others are dedicating parts of our life to preserving that legacy, because we just want to keep that spirit alive.
You know what my favorite part was?
What was your favorite part?
The writing desk.
Yeah.
And the little map with all the little pinpricks
Yep.
of where he was at. I don't know why, but that desk facing the window touched me in some way.
A window into a world through one man's words, photos, and film. a world we might not have otherwise known.
Did Dick Proenneke inspire you in certain ways?
To be a good person, be a good listener, to care about other people. Whenever anybody showed up, he always made sure that they had a good time at Twin Lakes. He'd take them out for hikes and hike at their speed, not Dick Proenneke's speed, which was Mountain Goat Plus. The most common question that he would get from visitors coming out to the cabin, the same question I would get from visitors visiting me at the Park Service cabin down on the lower lake was, don't you get lonely out here? And I thought, no, I never get lonely out here in the bush. And Dick never got lonely in the bush. There was always more things to do than 24 hours of daylight each day allowed you to do. Living out in that country, I just admired that he was able to do it for so many years and so loved being out there in the wilderness.
And sharing it.
Perfectly hits my grip here.
A knife Dick made for Fred, with a handle fashioned from an antler. A treasure from his time at Twin Lakes, where together they enjoyed life's simple pleasures.
We ate a hearty supper of spaghetti that I made, beans that Dick cooked, and the blueberry crowberry cobbler that Cheryl baked. Delicious.
So what's your wish for 100 years from now as far as the cabin?
That it's still there, that it's quiet retreat in the wilderness, that there's not hardened campgrounds around there, but it's still wild country, the wild country that Dick loved and enjoyed.
You can go to friendsofdickproenneke.org for more information about how to get involved. One of the group's projects to buy up private land near the Proenneke homestead to preserve the wilderness in the area. But they also raise money to maintain the cabin. You can make a donation on the website. Also, some of the proceeds from the sales of Dick Proenneke's films support the group's work. For more about that, go to dickproenneke.com. And finally, one other resource for you to check out, the Dick Proenneke Museum in Donaldson, Iowa, where there's a replica of Dick's Alaska cabin. So why Iowa? Well, Dick grew up on a farm in Primrose, Iowa, and you can find out more about that at richardproenneke.com. Our Frontiers motto, faces, places, and the spirit of Alaska, pretty much sums up Dick Proenneke. But there's also his love of our state, because this was where he was able to live out his dreams, something we Alaskans all hope that we can do in our own way. Thank you for joining us, and like Dick Proenneke, may you find your own frontier.